Hello and welcome to the next podcast episode that we offer here at New Hope Church. My name is Ryan, one of the pastors here, and I want to thank you so much for taking your time to watch or listen here today, whether you're in the car or mowing the lawn, whatever it may be. Again, I just appreciate your time and the opportunity to dialogue together and learn together. I did last episode and this one as well around the topic of discipleship. Living as a disciple, making disciples. This is our mission as a church that we articulate as helping people find and follow Jesus. And in this episode, I want to take a moment and talk about attributes of a disciple, specifically look at or talk about 3 marks of a disciple of Jesus. So if you're following Jesus, these are 3 areas of your life that you should see developed, grow, and put into action each day of our lives. And so my hope is that as we go through this episode, you'll get exposed to these 3 areas and then also ask yourself, evaluate yourself. How am I doing in each of these 3 areas? And are there ways that I would like to grow as a follower of Christ, specifically in these areas? Now, as we begin, I want to start with a question that I think is worth reflecting on and maybe even pushing pause to just give some thought to it. But here's the question. Why is it that when we read the Gospels and we see Jesus in action, we see his ministry and his life, that over and over again, people around him that were considered quote unquote sinners, the bad people, the prostitutes and tax collectors and those of ill repute in the communities where he visited and lived, they loved Jesus. Like they loved being around him. They loved talking to him, laughing with him, spending time with him. They couldn't get enough of Jesus. But when you look at the church today, specifically the church in America, what you see is not that. You actually tend to see the opposite, that the quote unquote sinners don't have anything to do with the church. They don't necessarily flock to the church. So why is that? Well, you only have one of 2 options, really. The first option is that the people who are, again, quote unquote sinners are no longer looking for Jesus. But I don't think that's true. And that's because of how God has designed us. Or what I think is more likely the case, the church isn't looking much like Jesus. And I think that can be a convicting conclusion to have. And maybe it's not fully fair in terms of how I've articulated today, but I think it drives home the point here in terms of what I'm trying to say. And that is, the principle is the more we look like Jesus, the more we being the church should be attractive to the world. Like the world wants to know the reason for the hope that they have. They want to know why we experience peace in life storms. They want to know why we have joy or how we love one another. Those are things that the world, the watching world, should see in us and say, I want that. Where do you get that? What is that? You see, these are the results of attributes of what the Holy Spirit builds into the heart and life of a Jesus follower. So again, 3 marks of a disciple that are critical to help us to become more like Christ. Here's the first one as we jump into this. A disciple is a person who trusts the Lord. Trust, this refers to faith. This is talking about facing situations in our lives where we know that hindsight will prove that God is working and has been working for your benefit. Do you believe and hold that God is trustworthy? And if God is trustworthy, do you trust him? You see, trusting God always acknowledges that he knows better than we know. He knows more than we know, that he always wants what's best. He always knows what is best, and he has the ability to bring it about. Now, to unpack these 3 different attributes, including this one about trust, I want to go to the life of Elijah. And Elijah, told in 1 Kings chapter 17 is where I'm going to be. Elijah was a rugged guy who was used by God in powerful ways. At one point in his life then, he was commanded to leave the area to essentially step out of ministry and sit on the bench. He was called to go live by a brook, to be able to drink from the water of the brook, and then for food, birds would provide daily food for him. That is an interesting calling. I mean, that is one that would stretch any of our faith if that was something the Lord said to us. The question would be sitting there, of course, for all of us. Really, Lord, is this really how you want to provide? You're telling me I got room service with birds? Like, how is this going to work out? This is a big trust test. But Elijah went. And then in verse 7, it says this: sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. So now we have another faith test. He passes the first one. He goes to the brook. He sits by it, but now there's no water in the brook. This is an unsustainable situation. And he's faced with the question, will God provide? Did the Lord forget him? I mean, these are things may have gone through his mind. Now, for some of you listening, in more of an allegorical kind of way, your brook may be looking pretty dry right now. In other words, you're going through a season of life where the bank account is pretty dry. Your marriage relationship feels dry. You've got, even spiritually, you're just going through a time where the Lord feels distant, and spiritually it just feels dry. You see, we all take our own turn of sitting beside a dried up brook. But in these moments, I want to encourage all of us, you, to come back to who the Lord is and how he promises to work. For example, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 49, verses 14 through 16, it says this: but Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe that's like, that's me. That's how I felt. That's where I feel like I am. But here's what he says next. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, and here's the key, he says, I will not forget you. You see, I have engraved you, in other words, tattooed you, if you will, on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. This is an expression of concern for your well-being. This is God's heart. This is God's character. Hearing this, though, when we face circumstances, puts us in postures and places of, will I trust God? Back to Elijah. Remember, he's thirsty. He's unsure what to do. Here's the kicker of this whole thing. From James chapter 5 in the New Testament, here's what we learn, that the dried up brook that's putting him in this position of dependence and trust in God is the very answer to how he was praying. You see, we learn from James chapter 5, verse 17, that Elijah was a person just like us, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain on the land, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years. And then because of God answering his prayer, he was paying a price. But what I love about this is that Elijah wanted more, what God was trying to accomplish in and around him, than he wanted his own circumstances to be good or his own comfort. How about you and me? You see, here's how I see this working out. At least it has in my life. Sometimes we can come before the Lord and we can say, Lord, make me a godly man or a godly woman. Like, I want to be a person after your heart. And we pray that, and it's a beautiful prayer, but we forget that the answer to that prayer will always come with suffering. It will come through hardship. And then we're faced with the question, but what do you want more? Do you want to be a godly man or woman, or do you want the easier road? How about us as a church? New Hope Church, and I hope you would pray this, and thank you if you do. Lord, I just pray that you would use New Hope Church to help people find and follow Jesus, that we would see lives transformed, that we would see communities impacted and neighborhoods, that God, your glory would be prevalent in Dallas County because New Hope Church, the people are here. That is a wonderful thing to pray for, but to do that, to pray for that, or in other words, for God to answer that prayer, it will come with a price tag. Are we willing to pay it? You see, all this comes back to the idea of trust. It comes back to the idea of trusting God day by day. It's understanding that spiritual maturity is never instant, and it doesn't come without a price tag. You see, as we trust God, understand seasons of being beside a dried up brook are not necessarily a sign of God's displeasure with you or disappointment with you, but rather something he's using in a marvelous way in your life. But it circles back. Will you trust him with that? A disciple of Jesus is a person who trusts God. That's attribute number one. Here's number two. Number two is a disciple lives a life of obedience. Back to Elijah. After his season beside the brook, God's call in his life was to go to another foreign land, and there he was to stay with a poor widow. And I mean really poor widow. And you can read more about this also in 1 Kings chapter 17. This was a humbling call, but he obeyed it. He went to live with this poor widow. Now, looking at verse 17 of that chapter, here's what it says happened next. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill, and he grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. This is a tragedy, despite the care and the prayers of this mom who loved her son. And Elijah, as a guest in the home, the boy died. And grief-stricken, the mom, being very human, picks Elijah out for blame. Verse 18 says this, she said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and to kill my son?" Wow. In the Hebrew language, these words are biting. She is striking at him. Her deep and severe grief in this moment, she views her son's death as judgment from God for her sins, and she takes it out on Elijah. Verse 19, continuing, it says this, "Give me your son." This is what Elijah said. And he took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his bed. In this powerful scene, this mom who's drowning in tears, holding her dead son in her arms, and Elijah comes and he extends his arms to her and asks for the boy. It had to be incredibly difficult for her to hand over her son to Elijah. I want us to notice here in this moment the gentleness of Elijah. This was a rugged prophet, but he had such gentleness. He had such humility with her. She was yelling at him, but he didn't argue with her. He didn't rebuke her. He didn't preach a sermon to her. He didn't reason with her. He didn't say these flat statements that sometimes we offer of, "Listen, ma'am, lady, it's okay. You'll see him again in heaven." He didn't do any of those things. He just extended his hands and he offered to share in her burden, and he quietly loved her in a moment of crisis. And I tend to think it was this kind of gentle, Jesus-like response to where she becomes willing to hand over her son to Elijah. And the text continues. He takes the boy out of the house, up the outer stairs to an upper room up on the roof of the home. And there he prayed earnestly. And he actually prayed pretty aggressively toward the Lord over this boy. He actually got on the boy, extending his body over the boy's body. This made him ceremonially unclean. This was something a Jewish person would never do, but he did this. And then he did something completely crazy. He prayed that God would raise this boy from the dead. Now you need to understand, at this point in biblical history, this had never happened before. You've never had a scene, you've never had a moment where God did this. Elisha couldn't look back and say, well, Moses raised somebody from the dead or Abraham did it, and so Lord, would you do it again? It had never happened before. And Elijah in boldness begs God for the life of this little boy, and the Lord raised him from the dead. This is, going back to our previous attribute, this is incredible faith, trusting in God. But you know what else it is? It's patterned, and it's a response of a man who walked with God obediently, faithfully over many years. In the book of Luke, chapter 6, verse 46, it says this, what Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you do not do what I say?" That's a convicting question. It was then, it is today, Because the reality is, when it comes to obedience, all of us are in process. But I think a central key to the life of obedience, of pursuing obedience, is that you come to a place in your heart and life where you say, I want to obey. I want this. I know it comes with a cost. I know it can be an inconvenience. I know there can be times I don't understand what God is up to, but I choose to do what he says. I choose not perfectly, but I choose to follow his commands. I choose to say no to me so I can say yes to him. And as we do this, God begins to work and move in our heart. Any other motivation outside of love for Jesus, for you to live a life of obedience, will turn obedience into a burden and will become something that you don't really want to do over the long haul and probably won't do. But it is a response of love for God. And so a life of a Jesus follower, number one, is a person who trusts God. Number two is a person who obeys him. And number three, our final attribute for this episode, that a disciple lives in relationship with God. You see, this is the core of a Christian life in the sense of what he's inviting us into. He, the Lord, wants to be in relationship with you. He wants you to know him as he knows you perfectly. He wants you to love him as he loves you perfectly. He wants you to talk with him in prayer as he has communicated with us so much in his word. He wants us to worship him. He wants us to enjoy him. He made us to be in relationship with him. His heart longs to be in relationship with you. He wants us to abide with him. This is his heart, and this is what he's calling us to. And the key here, when you step back and you look at these three attributes here now, as we kind of begin to conclude here, is that the three attributes are all interconnected. Trust, obedience, and relationship. They all work together. And because you see, every command in the Bible, every command that he's offered, every calling that he has for us in our lives, intertwines and needs the three attributes we've talked about to be at work. Like, let me give you an example. Prayer. See, prayer is something that we do by faith out of obedience because you love him. How about giving, like financial giving, stewardship? Well, that is something we do by faith out of obedience because we love him. Worship. We do this by faith out of obedience because we love him. And you go down the line, all three need to be in place. And what can happen sometimes is if even one of the three is removed and you only have two or one of those legs, if you will, standing, of those attributes, it doesn't work. And the Christian life becomes a struggle in terms of living as a disciple. So for example, if you don't trust Jesus, you're not going to obey him. That kind of makes sense. And maybe you've seen that in your own lives. Areas where you struggle to trust God, you probably aren't obeying him. So an easy example is finances. If you don't trust God as provider, you're going to struggle to be obedient in generous giving. That's just going to be a battle for you. Or how about this? If you don't obey Jesus, what Jesus tells us is it demonstrates that we don't love him. One of the ways that we demonstrate our love for God is by obeying him, of doing what he's asked us to do. And so obedience and relationship go hand in hand. And finally, if you don't love the Lord, there's not a relational pursuit there, you probably won't trust him or obey him. Or if you do, it's going to end up looking like cold religion and not warm relationship in terms of with the Lord. So these three things, all interconnected, all need to be in place. And so the idea is to seek to mature and grow in all three of these areas. And here's what I've observed in my own life. The more I've grown in relationship with the Lord, the more I want to know him. I've never met a person who said, I got to know the Lord and I didn't like what I saw. As we abide in Christ, as we get to know him more, we want to know him more. And as we likewise trust him more and more in more areas of our lives, the more we see his faithfulness and the more we're willing to trust him with more. because he's faithful. And finally, the more that we obey him, we see the blessings that come with obedience, and we're willing and wanting to obey him more. But it takes taking a step. And so again, my encouragement here is that you would take a moment before or as this podcast is wrapping up and to reflect, which of these three areas is maybe hardest for me? Or maybe I even would say it's a weakness. And then finally, if there's an area you can identify, or maybe more than one, what can I do today to begin to grow in the area of either trust, obedience, or a loving relationship? I hope that as you reflect on these, as you pray over this, that it is helpful for you as you in your life take steps to mature and grow as a follower of Jesus, and by extension then help others do the same. Hey, thank you for listening. Thanks for taking time to be a part of this podcast episode. I hope it was an encouragement to you, and we'll see you next time on the next episode. God bless.